I'm Tom Allen. I'm an extension and research plant pathologist in Stoneville, Mississippi with Mississippi State University. And Lucas and I were talking before we started this morning. He said, "You just cover beans." I said, "Well, the majority of my program is beans, but I cover everything," which makes juggling hats a little difficult because, as I just mentioned, I'm leaving to go to Tifton. So if you're standing in here right now and you think, "Oh, I'll just come back and see Tom tomorrow," I will not be here tomorrow. I am leaving as soon as this is over at about 11:15 because the Georgia Consultants Association needed me to come talk about bacterial blight of cotton, which is about one of my least favorite things to talk about, but I told them that I would gladly do that. Should you need me during the season, and I realize that I am in Mississippi, they only hired me to cover the Delta, but I cover pretty much the entire state. I'm in constant contact with my counterparts in other states. We basically have like a running little text stream throughout the year and shoot pictures back and forth to us. So we're pretty much on top of what goes on, greater part of the Delta, and then I run just about the entire state because I'm the only person in the state of Mississippi that's a row crop plant pathologist, which is really difficult when you have to cover corn, cotton, grain, sorghum, soybeans, rice, wheat, and all the rest of it. But it's fun. It's going to keep me young. And like I tell folks, I'm not shy, so please don't be shy. Call, text, email, whatever you need to do, and send me lots of pictures. I like lots of pictures. One picture's tough, especially if all I can see is the dashboard of your truck. And being as that I'm a Yankee, and as my wife tells me, I have no tact, you will get a smart-ass response from me that says, "That's a Ford, or a Chevy, or a Dodge." And I will not be able to tell what you're showing me in the picture. And unfortunately, I don't do a very good job tempering my frustration when I get really tired. So understanding that's half the battle, right? But I already had a request this morning, so I have changed this around a little bit, but I will talk about stem and root diseases because I know the one thing that everybody has talked about up and down the Delta and Arkansas, probably northern parts of Louisiana, throughout Mississippi is target spot. And this is target spot of beans, not target spot of cotton. But I do want you to keep in mind, they're the same organism. They essentially function the same way, and they are more or less a very similar disease system. Typically, lower to middle canopy is where you're going to observe that organism, and that causes all sorts of headaches when it comes to management. And I will try to allude to some things that we kind of have going on, and I'll have to get used to this, and we'll hope that the stinking pictures are going to work because the pictures are not going to work. But we can change that. Don't move it. This is what happens when you use somebody else's computer. No, we want you to use the pictures. Because if there's no pictures, there's no point in Tom talking. This is where I will say some sort of not good expletive. I expect you to. Comment? Yes. Four-letter word that nobody wants to hear. All right, let's see if this is going to work. Okay, good. All right. Yeah, darn. That won't be the word that I'll use. Yeah, that'd be good because it'll show up a little bit better. All right. I started in Mississippi about 10 years ago, 2007. And interestingly enough, as I went around, I spent those first couple of years taking a lot of pictures, trying to learn what was going on. And this was a pretty common observation when it came to target spot. All right. Really easy. The plant pathologists were pretty smart when they came up with the name of this. Does look like a target, okay? Which is nice because there are lots of plant pathology-based diseases that the names are not good at all, like downy mildew, powdery mildew, and some of those things like that are really confusing. You get nice between 1/8 of an inch to sometimes at most a 1/2 inch lesion on leaves, typically in the lower to middle canopy, that will have concentric rings, hence target spot. More often than not, you get a yellow halo around it. Okay, but that's not a great diagnostic distinguishing feature. And interestingly enough, the thing that I will try to impress upon you is, regardless of whether or not that lesion has either a halo, or B, is concentric rings, every one of those lesions on that leaf is target spot, which makes it really difficult. But you got to remember, my whole life is dictated by environment. So if the environment's conducive, you get nice mature lesions. Environment not conducive, things may not spread much. Because really what's going to happen is that leaf's just going to fall off the stinking plant. You fast forward to 2016, target spot overload. Was really difficult to tell what was target spot, and as a plant pathologist, I spent a little bit of time reading that diagnostic compendium, and we were running across symptoms this year that made no sense from what we'd seen in the past. Okay? Every one of the lesions on this leaf is target spot. Now the hard part is, I took this picture in Starkville. This just happened to be a fungicide trial on the North Farm there. This is 4744, which is a frog eye leaf spot magnet. And you barely can find frog eye on any of the pictures that I'm going to show you. But again, lower to middle canopy. Now the hard part about target spot is, and if you read those descriptions of this particular disease really carefully, you can get lesions produced on any plant part by that fungus. Yes.
Did that have fungicide on it?
In fact, the plot that came from did in fact have fungicide on it. I'll talk about that in a minute. Because the pictures get more interesting as I move through this a little bit more. So, these nice oval teardrop lesions on stems and petioles, that's target spot 2, folks. And we didn't start putting this all together in 2016 until we started running across fields where the fungus was actually fruiting on those. So we could take it back to the lab. When it cooperates, and it fruits, and it produces what it needs to produce for you to tell that what it is, that's not just a black fungus growing on there, that was pretty helpful. Because then you'll also get really awesome little stem-based lesions that will feed into this whole entire thing that I'll talk about when I talk about some of the stem diseases, because interestingly enough, we confused this with stem canker. Because these lesions do look very similar to stem canker. You can have symptomology from lesions like that that will mimic stem canker, because you'll get interveinal chlorosis in the upper canopy, which will make you scratch your head. Because you'll be on hands and knees going, well, I got stem canker. Nope, that's target spot on a super susceptible variety. That's a fungicide-treated plot too. Defoliation was somewhere on the order of 40 to 60 to 70%. Fungicide product did not matter. These were automatic R4 fungicide applications, and this is probably, it's beyond R5.5. But the defoliation in those plots was pretty unreal. I mean, it's nice when you can rate defoliation, and you could rate defoliation in 2016. But what you start to say is does a fungicide matter when it comes to that particular organism? Because it's going to be a tough nut to crack. And I think, and Trey Price and I talked about this at dinner last night and again this morning, the vast majority of what we saw in 2016 was environmental. This should not be an annual occurrence. And in the years I've been in Mississippi, I've only seen this twice. That would be 07 or 09 and 16. To this extent, because in 07 or 09 we had some consultants around Inverness, Mississippi that would tell you that you could shoot a rabbit on the other side of a field when they had bad target spot, really bad target spot. Okay, so this will walk into a little bit of the management talk, and I can't give you the whole management talk because we have a slew of isolates right now that are in transport to Fayetteville, Arkansas to be looked at, but you can make your guesstimations on how these are responding to fungicides without me necessarily saying that. Don't worry so much about what the fungicides were. And then I've had a couple people say, well, you didn't include this product or that product. Built this trial for a graduate student so that they could see things like phytotoxicity. And I wanted to just help her walk and rate plots and things, and it ended up turning into a really good target spot trial. The problem is you can't show yield because you had target spot in the lower to middle canopy and you had frog eye in the upper canopy. So frog eye is going to knock most of the yield out, so I had multiple diseases in the same field. So I can't make any estimations as to how this impacted yield, but I can tell you based on some of the fields we looked at, it was bad depending upon variety. Okay, now what you're looking at, x-axis 0, 2, and 4. That 0 is the day of fungicide application, that's 2 weeks post, That's 4 weeks post. Your 0 to 9 on your y-axis, rating for frog eye is super easy. You stand in a plot, you look out across the top. You determine how the fungicide performed based on what's in the uppermost part of the canopy. Target spot's a whole different situation. You're looking lower to middle canopy to see where the disease went post-fungicide application. So your 0 to 3, lower canopy, 0 being no disease, 3 being up a little bit, 4 to 6, middle canopy, 7 to 9, upper canopy, 9, massive defoliation. So what the fungicides do between 0, 2, and 4 weeks? If the fungicide did a really, really good job of managing that disease, what you would expect to see is one line here with your non-treated check and everything down below it. Well, you can't tell anything apart from this. And if you look at your products, it's Domark, Stratego Yield, Quadris, Quadris Top SBX, Quadris Top, the normal formulation, Quilt Excel, Custodia, Proline, and Affiance. Again, was a frog eye trial, but all of those things are labeled for target spot as well. Now, the one take-home message is this, and I've actually got a couple on target spot. First and foremost, if you planted cotton in 2016 and you want to plant beans in 2017, that's fine. Good rotation. The fungus that causes target spot in cotton, from what I understand and information that's based on what the University of Georgia graduate students and target spot cotton systems are suggesting, is the fungus that causes target spot in cotton will not cause target spot in beans. So if you planted cotton in 2016 and you had a lot of target spot, beans is a good rotation for 2017. But I would not plant one of these varieties in 2017 if at all possible.
About the Stein, was just question marks. Is that all Steins?
No, it is not all Steins. I'm sorry, that's a good question. I have yet to hear back from a consultant friend of mine, and I looked at a field, but I am assuming, and that's, I know, a really bad word to ever throw out. I think the Stein variety that's there, it's a 4.7 relative maturity, and I think it fits in this group of genetically. It's the same thing.
47 LF32.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah, I had
Yep.
one that was pretty bad.
It was really bad. But I can tell you this, just knowing some guys in the seed industry with some of these companies, the Mycogen variety got killed, Progeny variety got killed, the Dynagrow variety got killed. You're not going to be able to get them commercially. Target Spot killed them. It was that bad. And I'm still looking, I still go to meetings like this, and somebody will hand me a phone and say, we took these pictures and didn't know what it was, but based on your talk, is this Target Spot? Like, yeah, it's Target Spot. It was so bad in some 4632s, you could look at it in front of the combine and tell that it had target spot. Because they said, it just matured sooner than what it should have. Well, yeah, that's what it was. Let me come and look at your plants. And sure enough, stem lesions all up and down the stem. And this was a big swath in central Mississippi Delta, basically from south of Highway 82, which would put you like Greenville, greater Greenville metropolitan area, all the way up to the northeastern part of the state, was basically the diagonal, for lack of a better descriptor, across our state where we had just ridiculous amounts of target spot. Most fields we looked at, you could find a little bit, and that's pretty regular. In a normal average, which I don't think any of us know what an average year is in the mid-southern United States anymore. In an average year, you're finding just lesions in lower to middle canopy. It'll cause a little bit of defoliation, but it's not going to be so noticeable that you get really freaked out like you did in 2016. And a lot of that was, think about how much it rained. If you were in one of those places that saw like, I don't know, 4, 8, 12 inches of rain across a 3-week period, and that's when a lot of this happened. You know, when I was rating plots, you could tell pretty quickly, yes.
We had this disease in 16 in Arkansas, I know 15, and they didn't know what it was. It was in 47R17, and they truly didn't know what it was. So we did raise that.
The university or Armor?
Both of them.
Okay.
And we watered our banks like 6 or 7 times, and we were in drought, and we didn't get any rain. They just got real rank,
Yeah.
and we didn't use the fungicide.
And that's really what happened in 2016 is it rained a lot, you irrigated a good bit if you were on a nice good silt loam soil. Some of those varieties that are on that list right there do get rank. They're going to get really tall.
But it can happen without rain. I mean, it can happen if they get rain.
It's definitely how the organism causes an issue in cotton is rank cotton growth. And they're still pulling that system apart. But this is one of those, there's not a lot of information about this particular disease. And I say that because if you start flipping through most of the literature that we have access to as plant pathologists, and I'm talking the ones that talk about spore length and width and all that, most people glaze over on that. I glaze over on that because I don't want to use a microscope a lot to start looking at spore structure and size to determine things apart. 1950s, this disease scared Edgar Hartwig to death. In fact, the majority of the varieties that Edgar Hartwig developed were resistant to target spot. So something's happened since then, and I suspect we've just missed this disease because environmentally it hasn't been that big of a concern for a period of years, and it hasn't been well noted. And in some of those fields where you just saw stem lesions, if you get there late and there's no leaves left, you can easily misdiagnose this particular disease. And making a fungicide application once you see the disease that's not a good management strategy at all. You almost just have to ride it out. And that's really hard to impress upon folks because I get calls about all the diseases, and I know we all do. Hey, this is what I'm looking at, should I spray it? 9 times out of 10, the answer should just be no. But for this one, there's some decent varieties with tolerance. I would say just about everything should be considered somewhere susceptible, moderately susceptible, tolerant. There's not a lot that's moderately resistant or resistant towards the end of that spectrum, but there are some, like that NK variety, very few people plant it. You could pick it out of OVTs in 2016. It was that bad. Now, granted, it was planted in the late block, so you're only talking about 4 to 6 varieties total, but you could put your eye on it. There it is, and there it is. It's a 9 compared to everything else. No leaves, lodged, pods are a little tiny, and the seed inside's almost, you're going to blow it out the back of the combine. It's so small. So I don't know what direction to suggest on this. I would implement some tillage if you had a big problem. Don't plant one of these varieties. If you're going to make an automatic fungicide application at R3, R4, make sure the product contains at least 2 modes of action. Because I think right now, strobies, they're not doing a good job of controlling things like this anymore at all.
Are your sources seem to work well in Central Arkansas?
And I think we didn't end up with Preaxor in any of the 2 trials we did in Starkville, and the trials that I had in Stoneville. I wanted to rate 3 more times and just could not get back through that field at all. I rated more plots in 2016 in the rain and rain gear than what I ever had before. It sucks when your iPad's wrapped in a stinking Ziploc bag and you're trying to push through the layer of the whatever the boxes that I used on that thing, OtterBox and the stinking Ziploc bag. Yes.
I will say, I know that Mike Jenna had some of that this year, and at a certain time, the one that got the late rain during reproductive, it was horrible. He cut 12 bushels across that board.
Yep.
There was another variety in that field, and it'd go right up to 60. But, and we had some planted behind wheat, though, and they were some of the best beans ever in the same year,
Yeah, absolutely.
Rain, I guess.
It was that rain. It was like late July, early August.
Right there in early August.
I'd say like between the 20th of July and the 10th of August, depending upon where you were. Northeast Arkansas was the same way. They had bad target spot too.
So what kind of tillage are you suggesting to try and help benefit?
Anything that's going to break up some of that residue that you've got on the surface.
Don't worry about trying to bury it deep.
No, anything that'll increase the competition from the soil profile to reduce any of that residue and outcompete the fungus is a good direction to go. The problem is this thing's going to move in rain. It's going to be wind-borne. Not huge distances, But you know, it's like the old Cercospora blight adage. There's plenty of field situations. I've seen some CRP before that was never in soybean ever before, no soybean around it, no reason for it to have Cercospora blight, and it was the worst Cercospora blight I've ever seen.
What about rotation? Are we benefiting ourselves any at all? You know,
Well, you'd always be benefiting yourself if you put a corn crop in after some of that.
so the inoculant's not going to continue to build up with a corn crop. You know,
If you do some of that to limit overwintering, limit the amount of residue annually in a continuous soybean system, so put a year of corn or 2 years of corn in there, this fungus doesn't go to corn.
So are you seeing a soil texture relationship or not?
No, none whatsoever, because those field trial plots we did in Starkville were probably towards the end of a clay loam, and everything in Stoneville was heavy buckshot. And most of the fields I looked at, it didn't matter what they had. Irrigated, non-irrigated, narrow row, wide row, and the crazy thing is those plots in Starkville are 38-inch row spacing, and everything we do in Stoneville's on 40s. And we still had tremendous defoliation. So, you know, rank growth contributes a lot to that.
Did
And
you see it in short beans that the sun could get down in?
if you've got a bean situation where you do not have lap middles and the beans are not gonna, you know, they're not gonna get a good bit of foliage across that middle to increase the canopy and increase the low-lying humidity, you're not gonna have much of a problem with that particular disease.
if a grower, I work for some guys that are seed growers, and a couple of these varieties are still in the mix. I mean, they're going to be grown for seed. So when do you see a timing for a pre-action? I mean, we had luck with pre-action. When would you go ahead and do that?
I wouldn't change anything, but I'd watch the weather pattern.
So you think R3 is still a...
I think R3 or R4, that tends to still be pretty good. But, you know, I don't have any data that would support a second application.
We did a trial where we split the field. We did an automatic R3 application across the whole field and came back at like early R5 with the second shot of Preaxor, no yield difference, and we controlled the disease pretty. I was very well pleased with it. It was that Stein 47 left 32. The rest of the farm all around got Quadras top SPX, and we had to come back at R5 with a Preaxor shot just to buy enough time to finish that crop out.
I think the issue there is delivering the product where it needs to be. If your canopy's already closed, it's hard to get a fungicide down low in the canopy.
Yeah, I mean,
That's an issue with this disease.
even in Starkville, those are backpack ground plots, and then in Stoneville, everything we do is on, you know, tractor mounted multi-boom. So I can only imagine if you're trying to fly something to get it down middle canopy, and that's not a slight on ag pilots, it just is not going to happen. You don't get enough penetration into the canopy if you're dropping your load from 40 feet off the ground. That is a slam, but
Is there enough information? I mean, the thing that I'm trying to pick bean varieties for my guys this year, a lot of these guys don't even know what their target spot rating is on their beans.
that doesn't surprise me. It's not something that most states rate for, because we only rate what's going to be present within those plots at the time that we show up. So any of the OVT ratings that I do that are on the Mississippi Crop Situation blog, it's what's present at that location. So if it's not there, you can't rate for it. And most companies are going to do the same type of thing. And working with something like this in a greenhouse is just not going to be, it's not going to be a real good idea. And I don't inoculate large areas for for that type of work. It's just too difficult. You can't keep the inoculum clean, and you can't make enough fast enough to do that type of a system. Even though people have tried it in the past.
So another question around your fungicide applications. Do you feel that SDHI chemistry is bringing more to the table, whether it's Preaxor or another SDHI, Trivapro?
I would have to
Because in
look.
cotton, it seems the research is going that direction. That the
It is.
SDHI chemistries are bringing more to the table.
I would have to look at some of my trial work to see what we even had in there, because unfortunately we didn't pick anything for any specific location. We just went out and threw things out to look at different situations. And I don't think, I had 2 trials in Starkville, and I don't think I had anything in there that contained an SDHI. I don't even think I had Preaxor at that location. And that was just luck of the draw. Looking back, I wish we'd done like 3 or 4 more trials, but we didn't have the space. I'm putting you on next unless there's another question. Okay. Yeah, unless you want me to go for like 2 more seconds to talk about stem diseases really fast. All right, I'll throw this up there and I'll cover everything on this really, really quick because I think I've had a lot of questions the last couple of years about, hey, why don't you talk about such and such a disease, or why don't you talk about that disease, why don't you cover this, or nobody's working on that. I would say in my program, the only thing, we don't work on any Phytophthora root rot. Nobody does any red crown rot work. We do a little bit of root knot nematode. Nobody does any southern blight. Keep in mind that the majority of these diseases, and I will commonly get telephone calls from people about, oh, I had Phytophthora root rot last year. What do I do about it? And I'm like, well, describe your situation to me. They're like, well, on the dry land areas outside from underneath the pivot, I had Phytophthora. I'm like, no, you didn't have Phytophthora there. Phytophthora is a wet soil. In the years I've been in Mississippi, I've seen it 3 times. That's it. Not a very common disease, but I know in 2016, Arkansas saw a little bit more of it. I saw a whole lot more of it. But still, when I can say I've only ever seen it twice and then I add like 1 more field situation, that's a lot in some cases. But be mindful that any of these diseases on this list, and I keep meaning to put this on a crop situation blog, can produce your characteristic interveinal chlorosis, which would be the old SDS symptomology that everybody always says, oh, I got SDS on 8,000 acres of soybeans that we just sprayed with a foliar fungicide that produces foliar fungicide phytotoxicity. But just know that the other thing is, and because I know that the United Soybean Board's sitting in the room, they sponsor a tremendous number of projects that we are still actively working on to provide good information on things like charcoal rot that, quite frankly, if I had any hair, I'd pull all of it out over that disease because it's important. It can produce a lot of yield reduction in single field situations. It's really, really common because we see it all over the place, but we still have yet to really be able to provide a good hard and fast number or a list of varieties that somebody should be able to plant that would reduce yield losses to that particular organism and that particular disease. The other thing is, and I would be very mindful that root and stem diseases, we're starting to pick up a lot more of those. In the 10 years I've been in Mississippi, I see a lot more stem canker. I see more charcoal rot. I've run across an awful lot of the taproot decline that I will not say a lot about until we get our paper published, because then I'll feel a whole lot more confident in being able to say what organism causes that. But I can tell you right now, I'm the sole proprietor of the map of where that organism has been found and where we have observed taproot decline. Entire state of Mississippi, we've seen it, basically from southeast Arkansas all the way north of I-40. Louisiana, y'all run like west and north of here, but mostly northeast Louisiana, if I'm not mistaken.
Concentrated in the northeast.
Yep, okay.
But central and the River Valley too.
And we're doing some preliminary trial work on that to look at varietal response and things like fungicides as well as seed treatments. But, just know that the reason a lot of times we don't talk about some of these diseases at meetings is because it's not the hot topic that year. I regularly tell my northern counterparts that if I spent 20 minutes talking about wheat diseases, I'd get rushed out of the room. Nobody cares. That's a big northern issue. That's not a mid-southern issue. We've got a lot of information that's coming, and I think a lot of it just requires me being on my butt in my office in front of my computer right now, and I would much rather be here, to be quite honest. Be mindful of that, and don't be shy to call and ask. And with that, I will hand off to Lucas, and I'll be here through his talk. So.